the Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burt
and Stephen Molyneux.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Arabian Racing Podcast. I'm joined again by Stephen Molyneux from Dubai. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Yeah, very good, very good. And how's things out there?
Yeah, all good. Warming up pretty nicely. So, hopefully get back to England soon. Get a bit of rain and cold under my belt.
Well, yeah, we're having plenty of rain and plenty of cold at the moment. We may get interrupted by a massive thunderstorm, which is moving towards my kitchen window as we speak. So fingers crossed that doesn't disrupt proceedings. Today, we're going to be looking at two races that we've got coming up on Thursday and Saturday. Our first race is the Al Sawadi Beach Handicap Stakes. It's a 0 to 105, raced over a mile at Chelmsford City. Sponsored by the Royal Cavalry of Oman, which is the first of 5 races that they're sponsoring with us this year. Definitely falls into the small but select category, doesn't it, Stephen?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent race, isn't it? I mean, looking down the horses that are registered with the ARO currently, and I think Al Qasir is just about the highest rated, isn't he, at 106? So it's definitely the top end. A couple of horses that ran in the big Goodwood race last year, and a nice progressive young filly down the bottom in the form of Wanasa. So as you say, five of them, not the biggest field, but it's very difficult to split between all of them, really.
Absolutely. And to be fair, you could pretty much make a case for every single one of them. It looks a fascinating race, doesn't it, really? I mean, whether Al Kaiser is really genuinely off 106, I don't know. I mean, he certainly won very impressively on his only UK start last year at Wolverhampton, and of course he beat a Bir Athbar that day, and obviously that was over further. What do you make of that form?
Yeah, I mean, he'd had the benefits of runs elsewhere, hadn't he? So he was a bit fit. He was conceding a lot of weight, which of course he's going to have to do again at Chelmsford. But yeah, he was impressive over a longer trip. I suppose he's got the cut back to the mile, which is a slight concern. Not raced over it in the UK since 2018, the Premier Handicap on Dubai Day. So the trip would be naturally a bit of a worry, but obviously options are pretty limited for James, hence why he's running here. But class acts, they carry the big weights for a reason, and certainly wouldn't rule him out. But there are, as we've already alluded to, some interesting horses in opposition, not least from James Owen's own yard.
Of course. And just to go back to a Bir Athbar, despite the fact that obviously it was always going to be a big ask, bearing in mind at the time, I think she was rated about 85 when she went into that Goodwood race. I really thought that was a really outstanding performance, bearing in mind that she was racing against, some of the best horses in the world. I mean, the winner, Ebraz, obviously we know all about, and that was his second win in the race, let alone in the season where he won the Doha Triple Crown and so on. But also, you had Durayan, who went on to win the Kahala Classic, and Taif, who won the Arabian World Cup in France later on that year. So one heck of a performance from her. And certainly Peter Hammersley's horses have proved that they're already in good order with the win of Bin Auri, obviously in a much lesser race at Bath the other week.
Yeah, they've started well, haven't they? I mean, it's a funny race in that the handicap marks of both Bir Athbar and Tijari did shoot up as a result of that Goodwood race. Bir Athbar was actually rated as low as 81 going into the race, and went up £17 to 98. Tijari was rated 82, and that one got a similar rise in the weights as well. I think he went as high as 92 and has slipped back down to 89. So really, this is the first opportunity to kind of know whether either of those horses are a touch flattered by Goodwood. Obviously, a Bir Athbar did win subsequently, but that was in a conditions race, which again isn't really conducive to forming strong opinions. And she did beat an inferior rival that day beat inferior rivals in concession of weight. She was getting £4, I think, from Tijari. So there's a big weight swing at Chelmsford in Tijari's favour, which should see that one, on paper at least, reverse form. But like I say, I don't feel too sorry for Connections having run at Goodwood, because I think they picked up about £20,000 between them for finishing 5th and 6th. But they did rather pay the price in the handicap for that. And we'll probably know a bit more about both of them, I think, after this race on at Chelmsford.
Absolutely. And of course, another horse we're going to know much more about will be Wanassa. This will be her first exposure to some classier types of horses. And obviously the way that she won her maiden after looking like she was going to win her previous maiden, she won a novice, didn't she, at Chelmsford? Mm-hmm. But that was a fair winning margin. And I mean, funnily enough, actually, both James and Pete have said about their respective horses. Pete with the Beer Athbar and James about Wanassa. They both got their eyes on actually dropping back in trip, and the Zabeel, which obviously now will be sponsored by the Royal Cavalry Romana, has been mentioned by both of them in post-race comments last year. So it will be interesting to see how those two fare.
Yeah, certainly fascinating about those comments regards Wanassa. I half wondered whether they may try the UK Arabian Derby with her. Of course, she's only a 4-year-old, but there was certainly an element of her not seeing out her first 2 races. I mean, she could quite conceivably have won all 3 of those contests. Obviously, she wouldn't have run in a maiden the second time had she won the first, but on that first occasion at Wolverhampton, she travelled all over them. I think she might have even gone clear and just started wandering around under pressure. And again, at Wolverhampton, that was over the mile. She travelled best, just didn't quite get home. And then, as you say, got the job done comfortably at Chelmsford in a race that will probably give us 1 or 2 horses towards our other maiden this week, or they were certainly entered anyway. Cheek pieces were on that last day at Chelmsford, and whether that helped straighten her out or not, I don't know. But I think the fact of her win last time, she didn't really have to come under maximum pressure. Previous 2 starts, she had wandered around quite markedly and still looked very green. So be interesting to see what the winter's done for her, whether she's strengthened up, and just probably a case of if she's got the requisite experience up against some hardened sorts. If she does, then she's probably she's certainly the one with most scope, and off bottom weight would be quite interesting. But you would slightly worry about her wayward tendencies as a 3-year-old. But of course, you can forgive any horse that, given their relative lack of experience.
Yeah, of course. And obviously, as we say, it's her handicap debut. She's the youngest and with potentially the most improvement. You can't really get away from it. Just to touch slightly on the one horse we haven't mentioned, Farha. James, he didn't really get her right last year, and obviously she was campaigned abroad for the majority of her racing. Obviously, she was a close second to Lulwar on her final start at Wolverhampton, and she's the one which it will be hard to draw too many conclusions to the fact that she's got Dana O'Neill on board, because obviously Jack Mitchell won on Wanassa and Alex won on Al Kaiser, and that those £3 he's going to take off might just help him get his head in front. But certainly to people who don't follow the form, the appearance of Dane next to Farha's name is obviously going to probably sway them in her favour.
Yeah, I think the other thing to point out about Dane, I don't think he's done anything less than 8 stone 10 this season. So he'd have to be down at 8 stone 8 on Wanassa. I'm not saying he's not capable of doing it, but I'm probably going to suggest that he's not going to go out of his way to go that light on an Arabian for the first time this season. So the weight might be an issue as well. But yeah, I did think the continuity was Jack Mitchell being on Wanassa, and Farha was. I think I put her forward as the horse to follow a couple of years ago, and she did win a small field maiden, a small field handicap, beg your pardon, at Wolverhampton, and she was quite highly rated really on the back of that. As I think I've already said, any maiden rated in the high 80s, it's got to be pretty good, and that's what she was. She obviously ran in the Derby last year at Doncaster, and like you say, at the end of a 4-year-old campaign, and probably just feeling the effects really last year, and adding all the travelling as well. I mean, her sole run in England was perfectly good, wasn't it? Second behind Lulwar, and they came clear of the third. So again, probably another case of a bit like the 2 horses that I mentioned, the Beer Athbar and Tijara. We find out a lot more about what her current rating is on the back of Chelmsford in a couple of days.
That's right, and it certainly looks an interesting contest, and certainly one that I'm looking forward to. I mean, it is always a shame that we don't have a huge amount of runners for the higher grade races, but then you look at any thoroughbred card, and again, I mean, you'll see a similar sort of situation. Anyway, so looking forward to our race at Lingfield on Saturday. Back to another maiden. It's the Emirates Breeders' Maiden Stakes, also over a mile, and again, obviously, also on the all-weather. We've got 9 declared for that. Just going through the declarations this morning. Obviously, the most experienced horse in the race, Alma Buba, is a French import. She was running for Francois Rowe last year, and a bit like Abcarry, who was also in Francois' stable. But she's certainly she's come up against some fairly useful horses in France, and has been found wanting. But she looks like she's got enough form to win this against these newcomers.
Yeah, she was obviously going to run at Chepstow, wasn't she, prior to that one being washed away. And we spoke about her then, that her form wasn't necessarily going the right way in France, and she wasn't cutting the grade, but she was coming up against some very well-bred sorts from some hugely respected owners. So this is most definitely a drop in grade. There's the horses with form largely weren't declared, so it's going to be a largely newcomers that she's up against, and you'd kind of hope that she'd put that experience to good use, particularly around Lingfield on the poly track. It's not the easiest track, I wouldn't suspect, for debutant, particularly the Arabians. So yeah, it'd be, I suppose, disappointing. She could have run in the handicap off 85. James has obviously got plenty of runners in that anyway. So a case of splitting them up, and yeah, she should be too good and get that all important victory for the mare.
And of course, she's from a good Shadwell family that's produced horses like Handassa. So she's closely related to Abcarry, and you can see that getting a win would be important for her pedigree, and obviously the value of her offspring further on down the line. Of the unraced horses, obviously those 2 3-year-olds down at the bottom, they're getting an awful lot of weight, and if either of them were straight enough, then you'd have to give them the nod in some respects, because they've got some quite speedy bloodlines, a pair of them. I mean, obviously, and jockey bookings wise, both Mark Crown won on a debutante a couple of weeks ago, our first race at Wolverhampton, so clearly gets on well with them. So it's interesting. I mean, Munir is out of Salama, who won the juvenile race on Dubai Day. So obviously there's some early speed there, and Al Khaliji is a half sister to what's it called, Al Muthana, who's by Al Jakbar, and that won first time out for Phil at Wolverhampton. So there's a lot to like about both of them on pedigree, and they get the allowances. So the one potential issue, I suppose, is Pete's horse Amy, who veered violently left on her debut, and I see that Munir and Alma Buba are drawn either side of her. So if for any reason somebody gets taken out, it could leave it wide open for one of the others. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Amy was very green, wasn't she, on debut, and hopefully that experience of having gone through the stalls, I imagine they don't get an awful lot of practice at home. So for some of them, it would be very new, particularly on a race course. I guess you just think that Alma Buba is going to be a length or two too quick for them right from the start anyway. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem. The 2 3-year-olds that you mentioned there, drawn opposite ends of the track, one in stall 1, Al Khaliji, and stall 9, Munir. We did see a 3-year-old struggle in our previous maiden this season. So that they are still very young horses, aren't they? I know they're 3, but the equivalent of 2-year-old thoroughbred. So it's still very early days in their careers, but they do receive a lot of weight. It's a stone off the rest of the 4-year-olds and a bit more from the older horses. So I suppose you'd be hoping that they'd show something, really, wouldn't you? There's not too many opportunities for them this year. I know we have a 3-year-old only race coming up shortly, and I guess just that bit of experience going into that race will be key to them. But Alma Buba, obviously the one to beat with cheek pieces on, and I suppose the Phil Collington quartet worthy of mention as well. I know that the pedigree of Thea Afbar is pretty useful as well.
Certainly is. He's a half brother to Medath Afbar, who of course was second to Al Mortazez when the World Cup was run at Chantilly all those years ago when Longchamp was being rebuilt. Of the older horses, actually, without who are also making their debuts, Run the Risk, who's bred and owned by Sue Herod. He could be just one who he's that much older and stronger. And you were just saying about 3-year-olds being a little bit weak as the equivalent of 2-year-olds. He's a 5-year-old gelding, and he's sort of been on the verge of being in and out of training. And obviously COVID held things up for Sue last year. He could be the one that probably maybe takes advantage of the younger horses if they're not quite up to it. And he could go quite nicely, I think.
Yeah, it's just nice to see a few different owners in there as well. I know James and Phil dominate the race in terms of training, but it's not all Shadwell. There's a few others involved. So hopefully they'll just be after a bit of promise and maybe finish close enough so that they can be handicapped after just the one run to give them more options going forward.
Certainly, we need plenty of opportunities, and obviously with COVID this year, those opportunities have been somewhat restricted. We're back handicapping again at a slightly lower level when we come to the start of June. We'll be coming back to Chelmsford for a 0 to 65 handicap over 1.25 miles this time, sponsored by the Royal Cavalry Marne. And I suppose it's not inconceivable that 1 or 2 from here might turn up in that race.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure we'll find 1 or 2 there, and probably a very similar race to the one we saw at Bath a few weeks ago. That was over a mile. That was 0 to 70. So I'm sure plenty of those will turn up as well. It's quite a competitive division, and good to see they're well catered for, aren't they? The 0 to 65s, 0 to 70s, and of course we've seen the conditions booked for the second part of the season come out now as well. So maybe trainers can have a bit more forward planning in where they're aiming their horses.
And we'll be back to review both of these races and look forward to our next race in June. And hopefully we'll have had 2 quite competitive races to review.
Well, at least it's not going to get rained off this time.
No, absolutely not. Everything's safe on the all-weather this time. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Stephen, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again after these races.
No problem.